still think that looks so good. Take a look at this place. This looks so peaceful. This is actually the very same lake that I used to swim in when I was a kid. That's kind of cool. I think this is gonna look good. It's gonna look good. So it's definitely gonna be a challenge, but I do think that we can get some really good looking GoPro shots right here. So when you want to shoot any kind of cinematic footage or get that like really professional look with any camera that you're using, maybe the GoPro or the Sony a7 III or any camera that you can come up with, what you want to do is always try to shoot in the manual settings of your camera. So basically what I've done is that I've set up my own profile in the GoPro so that I can control the ISO, the shutter speed, the white balance, and everything that you need to control to be able to like get the most out of your camera. One of the main things that will dictate how good your image quality is going to be, like coming out of the GoPro, is going to be if you're shooting in 4K or if you're shooting in 1080, because the difference is huge. So what I did was that I shot everything in 4K 60 to try to retain as much of the image quality as possible. And when it comes to shooting cinematic footage, you gotta try to think of the environment as your playground and see how you can incorporate that into your sequence that you're gonna shoot. We have the boat here, and that is something that I want to incorporate. I'm thinking that this looks kind of interesting, you know, the rope and the chain here. And we also have like some trees in the foreground covering the sun that we can do something interesting with. So when you're shooting in 4K 60 with GoPro 8, you can't use the linear mode with your camera. You can only use the wide, but that's actually a pretty good thing, because like when you're using linear mode, the camera like crops away a part of the image, so you don't get like the full resolution of the entire like thing that the camera sees. So I'm thinking that I'm gonna move the camera like this to get the like chains and the rope as the foreground in this shot to make it feel more dynamic and interesting. This is also something that I want to have in the sequence, with the sun like peeking out between the trees, because I think it's going to look really cool. And we're going to try to keep the GoPro as close to the ground as possible. One thing that I do to get my shots like a little bit more professional feeling to them is that I hold my GoPro like this or like this, it doesn't matter, you know, it's basically the same thing, you know. And then as I move the camera, I'm basically like rotating it at the same time, and that gives you this like panning / rotating feeling that you see in a lot of videos. I also made sure to leave the hyper smooth option on, because like when you have that, it's gonna give you some like digital stabilization to your shot when you're going like handheld, so you don't get the like micro jitters and super small like twists and turns because of the small camera. And this kind of techniques works the best when you have some kind of foreground that you can incorporate into the shot, so you can see that the camera is actually moving a lot more. Because if you don't have any foreground, then it's not gonna feel like the camera is moving at all. But when you introduce the foreground, it's gonna feel like the camera is moving really nice, and it gives you this like, oh, professionale. I also want to try to get some like panning out shots from a foreground, maybe a tree or boat or branch or whatever you can come up with, because those kind of shots always looks good. All right, you have a couple of different like settings that you can play around with, which is basically the same as any other camera out there. So when it comes to the bit rate, you want to make sure that you have it set to high. And when it comes to shutter speed, it's going to be really important that you don't shoot at like 1/60th, because you always want to try to like double the frame rate when it comes to shutter speed. So if you're shooting like 4K 60, the lowest shutter speed that you want to have is going to be like 1/120th of a second, and from there you can only like double that up, and that is the GoPro going to do automatically for you. So like the maximum shutter speed is going to be like 1/960th of a second. Something that I like to do when I'm shooting like any kind of like cinematic B-roll sequence is that I try to like give the camera like a slight rotation so that it's hiding the fact that the shot is actually done handheld. And when you're doing like that, it looks so good when you slow it down, because it removes those like small micro jitters that you do with your hands. You also want to make sure that ISO is going to be set to minimum 100 and maximum 100, because if you go any higher than that, you will get a lot of noise in your footage, because like these sensors are so incredibly small. So if you like bump the ISO, it's not gonna look that good. And depending on the scene that you're shooting, you want to try to like set a manual white balance as well, because if you do that, you will get way more opportunities when you get into the editing process than if you're having it to auto and you can't control like the white balance of the shots that you're getting. I also made sure that I drag down the sharpness of the GoPro, because when you have it to high, it's like it doesn't look good at all. And as for the color profile, I had it set to flat to make sure that I can do some color grading to it, and that is not too saturated when it comes straight out of the camera. So I'm gonna try to do a shot with the GoPro that goes like that, so that it feels like the GoPro is going along the root of the tree and then revealing the sun up here. And we're gonna make sure that the end of the shot is like straight, and then we're gonna slightly rotate the camera backwards when we're doing the shot. So if you're shooting like entirely handheld with the GoPro, it's gonna be really hard to get those like super buttery smooth shots, unless you do like the exhale trick that works wonders. So when you're like moving your camera forward or moving it back, then try to exhale to make it like same as the snipers do. It is so cold outside. Sun is back, and it feels like it's been gone for like an eternity, but it's really cold. So that's like usually what it's like here in Sweden, because if it's sunny outside, then it's usually cold in the winter time, but if it's cloudy outside, it's a little bit warmer. That is not good. So I managed to drop the GoPro on a rock as I was taking thumbnail for this video. I thought there was like grass only, but apparently there was like a small tiny rock in the grass that wanted to hurt my GoPro. So one of the most important things, in my opinion, when it comes to like making your footage look cinematic and feel cinematic, is going to be the color grading aspect of said footage. Because if you don't color grade your footage, it's going to look pretty bad. And same goes for like S-Log footage when you're shooting with your Sony a7 III, because like color grading makes it look more professional. So it doesn't really matter what kind of videos that I'm color grading, I'm always using cinema grade when I'm color grading my footage, and that is because it's so easy to work with. So let's jump into Final Cut Pro and do some color grading to the GoPro footage, huh? So when I've opened the cinema grade up, the first thing that I do, no matter if I'm shooting with the GoPro or my Sony a7 III, is that I drag down the midtones to give it more contrasty look and like make the colors pop a bit more. And if you look at the waveforms down here, you can see that we're not hitting the 0. And if we're doing that, like if we drag the midtones all the way down, you can see that we're starting to like crush the blacks and lose some of the details that we actually got in the blacks. So we're gonna drag it back up to like 70, yeah, we can leave it at 75. So when you drag down the midtones on any kind of flat profile, it usually gives you a huge difference already. So looking at the before and after, you can see that like it does remove some of the grain in our shot, and it gives us a little bit more like contrast and saturated look. So personally, I do like to like bump up my shadows, so I usually drag them up again so that we like start to get a little bit more like professional look to it, va? Alright, so now I'm done with like the base correction of the entire thing, and now I want to get to the like the final grading and give it that final touch to the shot. So what you want to do then is that you want to go to the final grading tab up here, and then you want to expand on the right. Again, you get the same kind of like sliders and stuff, but we want to drag down the mid-tones once again, or this is my personal preference, and then I want to increase the blacks a little bit more, and then we're gonna like drag down the highlights slightly, and then we're gonna go down to saturation, and we're gonna drag down the saturation of the mid-tones to like -40, and then we are going to increase the contrast a little bit. And you know what? I actually feel pretty satisfied with the look that we got here. Look at the before and after. A lot of things has happened. So what I'm gonna do now is that I'm gonna mark the clip, and then I'm gonna hit Command C, and then I'm gonna choose all the other clips that I got on the timeline, and I'm going to paste the effects onto the other clips. I think that looks pretty good. Alright, that is everything that I do to make my GoPro footage look slightly better than straight out of camera. And I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, make sure you give it a thumbs up, because that is highly appreciated, so thank you so much. And if you haven't subscribed, that'd be highly appreciated as well. And oh, Peter from Sweden. Bye bye.